Kate Milafalcho. Welcome back to Irish Granny Helen. This is video number 4, UFO of God by Chris Bledsoe. When last we left, he was having all these dreams about snakes and caduceuses and gods of healing and communicating this dream to NASA. So we're on chapter 22. There was going to be a big 4th of July celebration at a nearby town, but his arthritis was too painful and he couldn't see the fireworks from his property, so he was going to miss out. He stayed home with his daughter, watching Independence Day, the movie, and painting. His son was on the mend. He had a first date with a girl to go to the town to see the fireworks. Jeremy and Ryan had gone to her friend's house for a pool party, and Yvonne had gone to her room. By 9:30, the booming was too much that he and Emily decided they didn't want to hear it. They went to get ice cream. He wanted to be outside. Oh, he waited outside by his truck for Emily. She called to him, "What's that?" And there was a huge orb over the trees, just like the one that took him in 2007. It kept changing shape and had weird motion inside of it. It seemed like it was churning and burning. Interestingly enough, the word seraphim, that kind of angel that Diana Pasulka wanted to name her book about him, the seraphim means the burning ones. He and Emily went for ice cream and, and on their return, their son and his son and her date were on the front porch talking to Yvonne about UFOs. So he was telling how they'd seen one from the car and watched it hover and then shoot up into the sky. And his son was elated because this girl that he really, really liked. Okay, the topic came up immediately. She saw the UFO with her own eyeballs. Then he could talk. He could tell her everything. She was into it. She didn't have a problem. She was really into it. When the other two sons came home, they were excited because they'd seen it too at this pool party. So September 23rd, Tim invited him to the Space Center to a rocket launch and had sent him a huge package of documents to sign and fill out so that he could get security clearance to be at this launch. Because Tim wanted to give him a tour of Tim's area of the facility, and it was off limits. So this was a temporary window of opportunity for guests to come into what was usually off limits areas. So it took weeks to fill out all the forms and get the permission. He had to go to several interviews. He had to account for his whole life, including they contacted school friends when he was a child, teachers, employers, distant relatives. Hard to believe, but they got the okay, and they had a huge set of rules he had to follow. Chris was one of 8 people who were invited by Tim: scientists, medical researchers, military personnel, aerospace engineers. They met the night before. It was casual. Tim had life or death seriousness about the whole thing, and they got the whole tour ahead of an official lockdown. So Chris felt it was surreal to be included with such highly educated, experienced, and important people. He asked Tim, "Why'd you invite me?" And he said, because they didn't want anything to do with the elite and the educated people in the group. But they did like Chris, and they were letting him see them. These other fancy people, well-placed, educated, famous, whatever, not so much. Tim said, "We need to learn why." Chris remembered the assurance of the lady and his message, and he felt better. He felt guided. He got a tour of this mind-boggling place, the scale, the complexity. There was a vehicle assembly building where they assembled 4 Saturn rockets at a time. It was the 8th largest building in the world by volume. It took 45 minutes to open the doors. And he said that when it's foggy, there can actually be like a weather system inside the building. It'll actually rain inside the building. He went to the astronaut crew quarters where they had medical tests before they went on a mission, and they were checked out afterwards. There was a den mother. This is a woman who worked there full time. She'd worked there for 30 years, dealing with, like the house mother for the astronauts. Only 300 people had ever been allowed in this building. One president, nobody from Congress. So he was in an honored position. So after taking some photos of the press conference room, he said, "We left Cape Canaveral for a seafood dinner on the beach. I took the opportunity to pull Tim aside and asked him, why me? Again, he looked me right in the eyes. Chris," he said, with gravity, "everyone who has ever been in those rooms has been to space. They brought something back with them, and it's still there. Now you have felt it too, and it has felt you. Everything will be different from now on." So Tim reminded him to sing that song if he needed to himself on the way out of the security block to block the mind reading ability. He describes it the next day. All this armed security, rigorous protocols. He was overwhelmed by the knowledge that that they needed to go into space, that the courage, the trust, the smartness that was involved. The group was warned. This next day, they were warned about how to escape in vans if anything went awry. And they told them about cars melting and that kind of thing. The only underground bunkers that were near the launch pad, the only underground bunkers that existed were near the launch pad. So I thought, this is interesting. He remembered, and I remembered, oh, isn't this interesting? Moses was shown these vehicles of God, vehicles of Yahweh working, but he had to hide behind rock because he was told that it would kill him otherwise. It describes the noise, the vibrations, the smoke, and all of that as this rocket goes up. So as Chris approached home later, he knew that his dog was dead. It had been hit by a car while he was gone, and he just knew before he even got there. But he went to the dog's grave, and he knew in his head, he heard that it would be okay, and then an orb appeared. Chapter 24. He kept in touch with Dr. Pasulka, and it was enlightening because she could connect everything to concrete ancient texts. The phenomena he saw, she could connect them to the past. He realized that humans had experienced them since forever, and culture and religion interpreted them, but they still were happening. Tim wanted to meet her, but she had made enemies in academic and religious circles, and she didn't want to deal with the government officials. She wanted to protect her family. That's scary. So eventually, she had a phone call with Tim, and they really hit it off. He got a package in the mail, and he was very careful about opening it. And inside of it was a napkin from Camp David, a patch that said Orion, and a jewelry box with a pin in it. It was a 24-karat gold triangle inside a circle, and he was shocked because it was the same shape that he'd seen on the chests of the beings in 2007 in his house. And I remember I pointed that out to remember that shape. That's why. He would learn that all of this was a closely guarded secret, that Tim and others who worked with the phenomena called it the OP pin, off-planet pin. Nobody knew who sent it to him. So he went to a specialist who diagnosed rheumatoid arthritis. He had a bad case. The diagnosis was bad. It was a shortened lifespan. It could cause blindness and organ failure. It's an autoimmune disorder. It's not just sore joints. There's more than that going on. The treatment was chemotherapy and immunosuppressants. He was shocked. He didn't know any of this. Like most people, he thought it was just, swollen joints, but there was way more to it. In 2015, he was invited to talk at Baptist College about UFOs and Christianity. He was afraid that he'd be a heretic and doomed to hell. He realized the phenomena were global, and he believed it was an angelic presence. He had discussed this with Diana about mistranslations. Now we're getting into Paul Wallace. Like the word cloud in the Bible really instead was angel voice or weather in the sky. And they wondered, were the clouds really orbs? Is that what they were really talking about when they described them? He recognized the descriptions. There were orbs as he had experienced them. Religious wars were very troubling because so many groups claimed that they had the key and they damned outsiders from their group. These are profound spiritual divisions. They lead to misery, dehumanization, and violence. We can see that happening today. I will add this. Tom DeLonge was told the same thing. Dr. Ogi Ogas, who was on this channel, was told the same thing, that the purpose of institutionalized religion is to divide people from each other. Not the good people who truly want to find meaning in life and help other people. It's not who we're talking about. We're talking about those who profit and use the belief systems to manipulate and control and divide. So the orbs gave messages to those open to it. So he was thinking, I don't know, would these Baptist students be open to it? So he accepted the invitation. He said he respects people who seek God even when the institution is flawed. Thank you. That's what I'm trying to say. And often the institutions are flawed. I would say, 100% of the time. So he met up at a barbecue restaurant in a private room, and these people were going to meet him. And at his place was a book called Ultra Terrestrial, and it had a little green man on it, and this made him feel uncomfortable. They had a good meal, pleasant conversation with people sitting next to him. But when he told his story to the group, and he got to the part about the third orb taking him up, the dean who was present stood up and started to explain using the ultra-terrestrial book about demons and negative forces and dark energy, and started quoting the Bible quite heavily. And Chris waited, and then he told his story from the orbs up. And within minutes, the dean stood up, shouted about Chris being taken by demonic forces, delusions, and the devil. Everyone was confused and embarrassed. It got quite silent. Some kind older women who were there came and told him, never mind the dean, who was staring at them at the time. Never mind the dean, they said. This lady invited him to her house for dessert. So they got to her house. Monica was her name. They got to her living room. They're eating cake and ice cream. And he said there were very nice people there who were very apologetic to him, sorry for him that he had been badly treated. They wanted to hear the rest of his story. They were curious and open-minded. So while he was telling about his father's kidney cancer, the lights and the orbs flashed over his head. Then one younger woman told him that she was fighting chemo-resistant kidney cancer. And all the way home, he prayed for her. And the next morning, one of his chicken eggs was the shape of a kidney. And not too long after that, she called and said the doctor gave her a clean bill of health. Chapter 25. July 2nd of 2015, he got a call from Larry Freschella, the host of the 2012 gathering. about a child, a 13-year-old child, dying of mitochondrial disease. You know, I think that may be what that young man, that Prince of Luxembourg, died of recently. The family was wealthy, and they had seen top experts, and the mother and the grandfather were both top doctors. The child was losing his ability to digest food, so Chris decided to give up the family 4th of July party and go see this child, and Larry met him at the hospital. The family was very conventional medical people, and it was a departure for them to turn to Chris. He met the family in D.C. Now, I want to be cautious about what I say here because I'm already, in trouble. All day, he said he tried to tune in to healing energy of the lady, and he did feel buzzing and energy that was growing stronger. He left the hotel late and checked in late. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. The kid's mother called him that late and said that the son was eating well. Eventually, Chris went to his bar mitzvah. The boy's family said, bring your family, bring your children, bring your wife, come to New York City. We'll put you up in style for the bar mitzvah. And they wanted to introduce him to Jim Semivan, who's called the James Bond of the CIA. He worked with Tom DeLonge at the To the Skies Academy. So they all met up with Larry and Jim and Chris and their family, and he told his story, and Chris showed photos of the burned tree and the orbs. Chris got quite emotional, and he said it was really tears of joy because he was in a room full of people who believed him. Then Jim told of his experiences with the phenomena, and Chris began to really hope for vindication. The next day, Jim and Chris got into a long, intense conversation, and Jim asked what Chris missed most in the world, and Chris said flying. And Jim said, you'll be able to do it again. So they described the ceremony and the party, and then a man at the book describes all that, it's kind of dull. Then a man at a table slumped over limp, and Chris felt like the energy of the lady was there to help. And this sick son eventually grew up and is in college. So, who knows what happened there? Chapter 26, Colonel J. Alexander and his wife came to visit. It was Chris's birthday. He showed the property to them and the tree, and he told Chris Chris's whole story, and Alexander listened carefully. He told Chris about adventures that he'd had, and Chris felt he needed Alexander to see some phenomena to impress him because he was connected and he might get messages to important people in the government if he was really taken by Chris's story. Alexander wanted to go to the river but it was under new owners that bought the land and under new owners. Chris thought they could risk it because it was far from the house of the new owners. Everybody wanted to go, but Chris knew the phenomena were less likely if a big crowd went. They wanted to keep it small. They needed intentional focus, and lots of people were too distracting. Also, you can't bring a lot of negative, intense emotions. And then, let me see here. He remembered something Tim Taylor told me the first time he met. Where more than one is gathered in my name, there I will be. For whatever reason, this memory gave me the impulse to bring only Emily along with John and his wife, John Alexander. I felt my children were magnetic for the phenomena, but she was the youngest and it seemed just right. So they drove 10 minutes and to a spot where the 2007 phenomena happened. He showed John where he'd hidden in the ditch and where the orbs had been as they walked to the river from the car. Chris had powerful recall of the original 3-orb event, and he got done. They returned to the car, and John asked, "Let's wait for full dark." And as he talked with John, Chris felt a familiar charge feeling inside of him. His hair stood on end. He said the woods abruptly became silent, and suddenly barking from the north and the south, like fearful barking. And he knew there was no house or dogs in those directions. A huge owl appeared. And he knew that the ETs were above them. He told John to look up, and they saw clear, bright stars. And then a huge orb showed, paused, and shot off to the south. John was blown away. He called Jim Semivan right there from the spot, and he told Chris that of 2 events, this for him was the most significant. John explained that Chris could communicate with him telepathically, that there was a temporal connection. Chris, he explained, had a physical sensation and strong emotions before an orb showed, and he will feel this way. When he does, he should go outside, and that they would be there waiting, that they're contacting him. So he said okay, that he would go out and wait and pray, and then they would arrive. His children were very relieved to be vindicated like this. Chapter 27. In 2016, he had a bad flare-up of his arthritis all year, but an increased amount of phenomena. He had the work of maintaining the property. It was getting to be too much. They'd lived there 12 years, and he was getting too physically challenged to do it. Jim Semivan came and visited, and he noticed and asked his son, Jeremy, "Why were you embarrassed by your father?" Jim told his son that these were worldwide phenomena, that they told of unfair persecution of experiencers through time. His son hadn't realized that. This son, Jeremy, had a hard time with all of it because of ridicule in high school, and he went off to college, and he rarely came home because this whole thing was just an embarrassment for him. He was upset that his aunts and uncles and cousins were hostile about it. And while Jim really questions his children, Chris saw how deeply their social environment had been negatively affected. I mean, it's the first time he's really hearing this. Jim strongly stated that let's do a sky watch tonight and invite everyone. Prioritize your classmates and your peers, especially the most critical ones. So Chris showed Jim the cabin near the pond that he and Yvonne were moving to. Chris was worried would the phenomena follow him. They had before all over the country, so, Anyway, Jim commented that Chris's life was like Job's, in the Bible. This chilled Chris. Job's life was a battle between God and Satan. They tortured or helped him to fight each other. Jim told him of ongoing studies that were finding that for experiencers, this was true, that 12 years from the first encounter, the people had positive changes in their lives. 100% of them were blessed with happiness and success. So in 3 years, it would be 12 years since the first encounter, January 8th, 2019. So this gave Chris a goal to hope for. He got ready for the sky watch, and by dusk, there was a small crowd. The kids had been told by Jim, that Jim was a man from the CIA, and that he wanted to talk about Chris's story. So about 12 people came. Chris recognized some as young people who were friends of the kids, but also graduates of the local police academy. Jim introduced himself and told how important Chris's case was to NASA, CIA, FBI, the Vatican, and the Department of Defense, the White House, and other global leaders. He denounced the Discovery Channel episode. He called it ridiculous, exploitative, and a huge disservice to the very important work that Chris was doing. Chris felt extreme gratitude. It was direct vindication, especially for his children in front of their friends. It was his birthday, and Jim gave him the gift of a lifetime, he said. And after this night, their lives changed. The community began to realize the harm they'd done to these people in the past. No longer did they look at Chris as demon-possessed or crazy or addicted or whatever nonsense. His relationship with Jeremy improved. The family became closer. The wounds began to heal. Jim told Chris about Tom DeLonge and the To the Stars Academy. You can go back in my videos and you'll find I believe it's video 6 and video 7, episode 6 and episode 7 of the UFO Rabbit Hole podcast. Tells the whole story. Tim called Chris and invited him to California. Flew him first class with great hospitality and kindness to meet with Tom DeLonge and Chad and Carrie Hayes to discuss a film project. Those are the screenwriters. A film project at Tom's talent agency in Hollywood. One of the things Tom DeLonge did was use his rock and roll money to design a film production unit to do documentaries about these topics. He went next day to Ensenadas, where this is near San Diego's Tom's hometown, and they ended up sky watching on the beach, and they saw orbs. In a few months, Chris met with Tom and Lou Elizondo with samples of the metal that Chris had been told came from dripping from the orbs. These guys had collected this stuff dripping from the orbs. They had the metals tested and the results were classified and they were never returned. Chapter 28. 3 years passed. He had really bad arthritis in his hands by then. He even needed help with buttons. He saw the phenomena about 2 times a week, especially Easter and Christmas. He was anticipating that 12-year mark of January 8th, 2019. Their cabin was very private. The orbs continued there, and he found that he did have the ability to give others the ability to catalyze their environment and get the orbs and the beings to appear. He had difficulty traveling, so he wasn't going to conferences. He was very tired from his health, and he wasn't giving interviews. He said it was demoralizing. He was encouraged when, with a doubting relative, an orb would appear over his head and change their minds. His arthritis was so bad that he was concerned that it would kill him because there is reduced lifespan. So on January 8th, he was sitting by the pond remembering the event that he'd seen 12 years ago that had started all this. The anniversary came and went with nothing happening. He took Jim's advice and began to pray for himself. Easter approached. By now he should know. I know, you know, he should know. Easter approached and he waited by the pond hoping for Easter Saturday night phenomenon, but nothing happened. The next day he was disappointed, but he felt that the lack of any phenomenon was not punitive. But that evening, sitting quietly, there was a charged atmosphere that came over him, and he walked to the pond, and there was an orb 200 feet above an 80-foot tree. When he saw it, it began to descend. It settled on the shore, about 40 yards across from the pond from him, and it went up 10 feet and down 10 feet, up, down feet, and down 10 feet. It shot up and down while changing colors. And he felt that there'd be a meeting soon between him and these entities, and he prayed that he wouldn't get hurt. Pasolka likened his arthritis to the stigmata of St. Francis. So as he looked at the orb, it began to see the outline of a tall being. Inside of it, the orb seemed to be part of its body. Tall, majestic, broad-shouldered, but not quite physical. It approached, gliding over the water, and he was able to hit record on his phone. It stopped in the center of the pond, and Chris felt a sense of peace. He felt his skin prickling. It hovered. It flashed colors. Time passed without him noticing, and he realized he had not hit the record when he did. the being went dark. Oh, he realized he hadn't hit the record. He thought he hit the record. He hadn't hit the record when he did the being went dark. Then there was a flash, and then dim periodic flashing, and then he hit record, and he was hit by a huge fatigue, and he dragged himself to bed. He woke dazed. His head was flooded with visions and understandings that he didn't really recall being told. He just knew he had information. He felt like he'd been programmed like a computer. So these are some of the messages that he got. We will allow you to film us more and share with witnesses. Share the truth. Difficult times ahead. Now, this is what he was told. I'm not saying this. This is the message that he received. Famine, plague, and unrest were just over the horizon. My work was now to prepare for this, in addition to getting the word out about the phenomena. I wrestled all that week with how to tell my family and friends without alarming them too much. It was difficult for me to reckon with such an ominous message coming from phenomena that I always known as benevolent and good. Armageddon seemed like a bit of a stretch, and I didn't want to risk our reputation or scare people if there was a chance that I was misinterpreting the message. By the following... Okay, don't have to read the next part. He realized he had to spread the word. And in 6 months, he gave 10 different interviews of warning. Be prepared to live at home without modern comforts. Stock up. Someone sent him a night vision camera, and others came too, and they captured many images. His friend Hal Provenmeyer died. He had always been kind and generous to him. He scheduled a visit for Bob McEwen. McEwen? A scholar, a government official who had asked to come and visit. And the first 2 nights of the visit, there had been a big storm. And on the last day in the evening, Chris got that feeling again and knew that they were waiting for him. He invited Bob and Bob's wife to go outside to look. There was an orb that slowly approached. Chris's son used the fancy camera and got a picture. Bob saw flashes and sparkles over Chris. Chris told Bob that the phenomena would follow Bob home. And he didn't know why he said it. He just said it. It just came out of his mouth. A week later, Bob called him. Water was materializing around the inside of his house, just like water. And he was freaked out. Chris told him that it would be okay. The next week, Bob called back to say that the symptoms of the stroke that his wife had previously had gotten better. February 2020 in San Francisco, February 2020. Now, what happened then? He gave a speech in San Francisco. He had an enormous sense of dread of trouble coming, and then we all know what happened. He was terrified because his condition was immunosuppressive, and he was down to 150 pounds and was weak. And he was taking immunosuppressant drugs. His doctor told him to stop the immunosuppressive treatments and to stop the prednisone. His whole family got COVID. He had to quarantine in his workshop. He spent 6 weeks alone in his workshop. He noticed that his joints were not swollen and that he could walk without a cane and that he was free of pain and had higher energy. He started to ask himself, maybe what I was experiencing was side effects. Or he did pray a lot, he said. Chapter 29, September 2021, Colonel John Alexander wrote to him, said it was urgent. Get in touch with David Broadwell, who communicates with the phenomena in Northern Virginia. He had a long list of people to contact. John had to remind him, and, he forgot. It was weird. He had like a mental block, but John reminded him, and he did get in touch with him, and he said he became close friends with David. He had enthusiasm about this topic and a really good heart. In June of 2017, David had been driving in Northern Virginia and saw 35 white discs appearing and hovering 2,000 feet in the air. And he said it was like it wanted his attention, one of these discs. And he saw two small white orbs on either side of one of the discs. All three moved independently, but also seemed connected. There was no sound, and suddenly they were gone. David was 2 miles north of Mount Weather, a U.S. government facility for continuity of government. Now, we learned about these places when we did the book Nuclear War. You might want to go back and look. You might not want to go back and watch those videos. Continuity of government is when they get anyone who survives, who's in the government, and whoever's the top person in every department, no matter how low, because it's like designated survivor, kind of. So this is the relocation of important people in a catastrophe. It's the location of the Federal National Atomic Recovery System, something like that. I don't know what the letters stand for. There's a high-frequency radio system and a connection to the federal public safety agencies and the military. It connects the president to the emergency system, the emergency alert system. It's also underground. It's an underground base for the Supreme Court and congressional leaders. They all went there after 9/11. David was baffled. What had he seen? He was a pilot, and he had flown the area for more than 20 years, and he's seeing this disc and orbs, and he knew that it was too close to the air defense ID zone, and he felt that he knew, he had a knowing that it would come back. 2 weeks later it did, while he was driving on the same road. Hang on here, let me see what I got going on here. And he saw it hovering. He got out of his car and he approached it. It seemed to communicate with him. Afterwards, had a minute of intensive connection, and it left and it vanished, and it just dematerialized. He was moved by what he felt was intelligence in this thing. He tried contacting all sorts of federal officers and departments and journalists. He got Politico to do a FOIA request and was told, our search revealed that there are no records responsive to your request. Okay. David knew that telepathy was key. He talked with Colonel Alexander, who contacted Chris. Chris had deduced that most experiencers had suffered trauma in the past. It made them somehow receptive to telepathic communication. David admitted his wife was in very serious condition, and in the middle of it, she began to experience phenomena. Chris felt an intense connection, and that the energy knew that they were waiting for him. He took his phone, with David still on it, and his camera outside, and this is what happened next. He opened the door. Immediately, the sky was alive with light. Beautiful orbs were everywhere, or what ancient texts called chariots of fire. I began filming and told David about how excited the heavens were that we were talking to each other. I knew instantly they wanted me to meet David. I had never seen such a reaction before. I was full of electricity. Just as excited, David walked outside of his Virginia home and looked up. Above him, orbs began appearing and flashing just like above mine. It was as though they were signaling to us both, above his home in Virginia and above mine in North Carolina. Right away, he asked if he could come and visit, and I readily agreed. So he came to the house in the next week, and that evening, while they were alone, talking, Chris felt like the energy, and he said to David, they're here. And above his house were bright orbs 400 feet up. Chris was usually, he said, usually there are two or more that come, and there are three inches big, I guess. David was blown away at Chris's connection and communication with him. David wanted to bring Chris to Monroe Institute research, which looks into the deepest aspects of consciousness. They use a lot of technology to study it, and they explore what's beyond space and time. Began to get the idea of secret gatherings at Monroe to use sound technology to explore these experiences. These were developed to enhance remote viewing and telekinesis. There's all kinds of weird studies going on. It's incredible. They thought that a group of UFO experiencers might help the understanding of the precognitive state. David planned a meeting, and he and Chris kept trying to coordinate sightings, and when they talked on the phone, both would see phenomena at the same time. And they began to think this is the entanglement theory, Einstein's quantum entanglement, spooky action at a distance, two things separated at the same time reacting together, separated objects sharing a condition or a state. They actually got the same kind of cameras, and they synchronized everything. They worried that if they both focused in the same direction from different homes while on the phone, and they left their speaker on, would they be able to record something? There was a flash over their heads, and this is happening to both of them in different places. A flash over their heads and orbs, but it happened so quickly and so close that they didn't get it on film. PhD Jeffrey Kripple once said, "In the past we interpreted the UFO as gods, goddesses, angels, demons, and today most would interpret the UFO as an advanced form of technology. Why is it that we don't interpret the UFO today as gods, goddesses, angels, and demons?" While I don't have academic credentials, this is Chris speaking, postulating these theories or speculative papers, I do have real genuine videos of the phenomena witnessed in real time by government officials and lay people alike from young to old. Maybe this is this guy Cripple talking. My videos show interaction plain and simple. The videos, now number in the thousands, are increasing exponentially for reasons I do not know. That is significant. David arranged a meeting in May of 2022 by invitation only, and it was a 5-day use of technology to interact with the phenomena. The people that were there was an eclectic bunch: Hollywood actress, psychic medium to the world-renowned UFO explorers, ex-military, government employees, distinguished professor, a podcaster, a hippie, a Bank of England financial analyst, an Argentinian, and a big strapping cigar-smoking Texan thrown in for good measure. In short, every kind of person, all united by their experience with the phenomena and a passionate desire to learn and explore. He brought his daughter Emily. At the Institute, which was near the mountains of Virginia, in the back there was a grassy plain with 6 large quartz crystals in the plain. The first night, 20 people in a circle felt the energy. They decided to walk to the crystals and sit and lean on it. He asked for interaction, and there was a huge flash over the mountain. He needed to leave a large group like he did to get interaction. So when he left the group, he got visitations. They did many experiments in the following days. They did sound exercises, and these are explained in the book, but they're really complicated to describe. They involved blackout cubicles and special sound frequencies to alter the brain, and electromagnetic stuff, and environmental to sync everything with the right and left hemispheres, and I just gave up. One night, everyone came out crying from the experiments. Chris was asked to be in an EEG electroencephalograph brainwave experiment, and only his left brain registered and kept registering even after he was disconnected. So they couldn't get an EEG to work on him, which they found a very old one and tried it. Chris didn't know that one of the test objects that he was handed was the alien metal. He didn't know that. He had described the box he held with the alien metal in it as feeling alive. He was told that Uri Geller got the same result. There were no phenomena in the sky because of two very extreme skeptics in the group. Chris asked them to open their minds, and then they all began to see flashing orbs. One skeptic thanked him for opening his mind, and as he apologized, another orb appeared and flashed off and on for more than an hour. And they did get that on film. So he says, the last 16 years have been a tremendous test of my faith, but this story does not end here. It continues with you. Do you want to experience the phenomenon? All you need to do is humble yourself before the heavens. This simply means go outside and look up. Connect your heart and mind as one. Humble yourself and say out loud, I am here. It's not more complicated than that. God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, did not make it difficult to connect. You don't have to follow some set of formal instructions or learning fancy words and acronyms to experience the phenomena. It is between you and God, using that term, however. Just pick one spot in the night sky, surrender yourself, and say, I am here, and don't give up. Stay positive. This is just the beginning. The end of the book, The UFO of God by Chris Bledsoe. I just am blown away by the experiences that he had. And it is like a story of Job. He did suffer quite a bit because of it. People underestimate chronic conditions and how difficult it is to live 24/7, 365 days a year, never really feeling okay. So this was hard for him, but I think at the end, there's such a message of hope. Really, really interesting, really good stuff. So thank you very much. Thank you for watching, and I guess I'll be back. Slanga foil, slancha.